Welcome to the DFS Down Under show. It's Adji here, not Smatho. Hef, thank you as always. Rock solid, one of the key members of the team. You're always here, and it's good to have you back this week.
Thank you. Welcome to you for your debut. Bit disappointed in Smatho. We did try and get him live from Fiji, but a little bit of mail's come across my desk. They may have run into some issues, Smatho. I'll reveal that later. We did send through, just like the AFL, a list of what we can and can't say, but we won't worry about that.
No.
If Smatho's not here, it's fair game, I think.
Well, look, I'll certainly try to fill his seat as best as I can. As you can see with my fantastic background, it does look like I am being held hostage. So I do have some requirements that I've got to follow that Smatho has told us to keep going with. But look, you know, if you want to abandon ship and go away for a week and leave us up to our own devices, well, can't make any promises.
Exactly. He may live to regret that, Smatho, but yeah, we'll get back to that. We do have a little bit of footage though from him, I hear.
We do. So we'll get that into a second. So look, as always, let's have a look at some of the previous results. And I guess the first one we'll talk about is the fantastic Draft Stars 200k live final, which, of course, you've already got 2 tickets to, so you can save yourself a little bit of money each week. But there was another 8 winners over the weekend. So just want to get my notes up. Trent L, Barnabas, JRG 1990, Brickers Boys, Yid Army, Dale Townsend, and Body Cam Crush, which is a name that a few of you will be familiar with. Now, he actually won 2 tickets that night, which makes it his 3rd ticket, or 3. He's won 3 tickets now. So we're waiting to get a little bit of clarification on what will actually happen with his 3rd ticket. But have you heard anything, Hef? Any ideas of what might possibly be going on with that?
I haven't. I'm interested to find out. I did think during the Big Bash that it might be something that could happen with someone winning 2 tickets on the one night. Huge effort, by the way, for him to win both those tournaments. So, yeah, I'm interested to find out what happens there.
Well, I think the logical way, the rules that if people aren't aware, that if you win your 3rd ticket, the person that comes second in that contest actually gets that ticket. But we've never really had a situation where anyone's won 3, let alone winning their 2nd and their 3rd in one night. So I presume the fairest way would be a playoff between the 2 guys that came second in both those tournaments. But really, it's unknown. You know, I know Cam was on Twitter saying that surely he gets to choose who he gives it to. But I imagine there's probably going to be some sort of playoff or some sort of decider for that extra ticket.
Yeah, that seems a bit ambitious, but I wouldn't be against them in future allowing the 3. If you happen to win 2 on the one night and you've only got the 1 before you entered, then, well, it probably seems fair enough that you could claim all 3, but that's up to Draft Stars. And either way, I'm sure Cam is extremely happy to be heading to the live final. And there's still lots of tickets left, isn't there?
Oh, there's heaps. I think about 80 off the top of my head. So there's still plenty of opportunity. And as the weeks get closer towards that date in August, people are going to be really hungry to win those tickets. So, you know, make sure you jump in the qualifiers now. There's pretty much 2 qualifiers for every slate on Draft Stars. So get involved there. And we will see you in August if you can win a ticket. Hef will be there. Smatho will be around interviewing everybody and trying to keep him just sort of on the down low. We know the young man likes to get amongst it and have a few beverages, as we saw at the Big Bash final. But all the DFR team will be there doing interviews and covering the event live. So we're really looking forward to it. So make sure you win your ticket and get involved. Let's have a look at a few of the results from the weekend. So there were obviously tons and tons of huge contests, and there's some amazing prize pools that are going around at the moment on both the sites. Moneyball each week is stepping it up. Draft Stars is following as well, which is a really exciting time for the DFS industry. There's obviously been a lot of Twitter talk and conversation over the last couple of weeks about the pros and cons, I guess. But look, I think everyone's got to really take a breath and see how positive this is for everybody. You know, we look back a couple of years ago where you would have $100,000 contest on a grand final or the opening day, you know, of the league, whereas now we're having multiple 100K contests every week. So it's really exciting stuff, and yeah, let's hope it continues because it's really good for the players.
Oh, for sure. And I just know personally the amount of people I've seen get into DFS the last few weeks has just been amazing, and it's all the lure of that big prize pool. So whether obviously if you're putting one team into a field of 5,000, it's going to be very hard to come up the top end. But I think you see a lot of these people get introduced to DFS and get the bug like we've all got and hang around, and that can only be good long term.
Absolutely, and even on the lower end, it's probably we can't all be as good as you and win these contests quite regularly, but more people playing bigger prize pools means more people are min cashing. So even if you're playing your one entry for $15, you've got 1,200 spots that you might be able to double that money to 30. So yeah, everyone take a deep breath. This is really exciting times. Let's support all the sites. Moneyball, Draft Stars, they're doing a really great job, and yeah, we're certainly excited about it. But let's move on to the first 100,000 of the weekend, which was at Draft Stars. And look, the team's up on your screen now. Mr. Faded Glory took that out for just under $10,000. There were a couple of quite well known people in the industry. Rudy, of course, finishing fourth for just under 2K. S. Morrissey, who's a Team DFR member. Lion for Life, who's very well known in the Australian scene for absolutely dominating the play on 25K or the 100K contest last year. Barnabas, who, just as we mentioned, won one of the live final tickets. Really, it was a who's who in the top 10. But what did you think of the team, Hef? Obviously, Collingwood players are always going to score well, but Braden Sire, or Sear, however you pronounce it, is probably one that sticks out for me. And yeah, Christian Salem came back. Oscar Baker scored 76. It's a pretty good looking team.
Yeah, it is. So, there was a chance it was just going to be full on Collingwood stacks on Monday, wasn't it? But Melbourne really, they brought a bit more to the contest, I thought, Melbourne. They've still got a lot to work on, but I didn't really like Stephen May, but I like their structure a lot more with May and Lever in the back half there. And obviously Brayshaw spent a lot more time in the middle and scored big, and Maxi Gorn went big. So it was a more even contest, and yeah, great team, well deserving of the win, and yeah, well done to everyone in the top 10 there, because that was a massive contest. So anytime you can sneak into the top 10, it's a massive achievement.
Yep, absolutely. And that then moves across to Moneyball, where they had their $100,000 Saturday special. And there was, well, let's just say domination from a couple of these players. So we'll get to JK in a second, who's Lamador. But Tarzan, who, as obviously there's been a little bit of talk about him over the last couple of weeks, he absolutely destroyed it. He had something like 14 out of top 20 spots. He finished in the top 20. Jay obviously snaffled up the other ones, including top prize. But really, that was a pretty impressive effort from those guys.
Yeah, I was clicking through that leaderboard, and I was top 40, and Tarzan had about 30 of them, and he had 40 out of the top 60. It was something I haven't seen since the likes of Try and Hit last year, early in Draft Stars. Just a total domination of the leaderboard. Yeah, obviously that's a great time to do it, the 100K contest. But just as everyone was sort of thinking that it's just going to be the domain of the big max entry guys, we had the Queen's Birthday 75K on Moneyball, and that was sort of dominated by a lot of smaller entries. So I think there's still room there for the little guys. Don't get too disheartened just because you see, obviously these guys are good players. If they're putting in a lot of teams, they are going to take the leaderboard a number of times, but the times they miss, there's a lot of cash there up for grabs.
Absolutely, and everyone likes to talk about all the times where they clean up and take all the winnings. But, for example, Chris Eddy, who's taken a little bit of flack over the last couple of weeks, I think on Monday he completely bricked on Moneyball. So, see you later, a couple of grand down the drain. But, yeah, look, good weekend by those guys. And obviously Smatho, he adores JK, which is probably the nice way to say it. He's got posters of him. He's got a shrine. He's, legally changed his middle name to JK. He absolutely adores him. And, of course, him winning this much on the weekend and him not being around to do the 2 thumbs up, he had to send us a little video message.
Hello, boys. Smatho 10 here on location at the Denaroo Golf and Racket Golf Club here in Fiji. having a bullet time. It's Fiji Gold choice, bro. Hey, thumbs up to my boys this week. JK123 for smashing the weekend. Unfortunately, I've only got one thumb. Thumbs up to you. And J to the P, Jesse Penfold, our boy at DFR. You can have a thumbs up as well.
So we can already see from that Smatho was starting to be a little bit confused, a little bit delusional. He didn't know whether he was in Fiji or New Zealand or what sort of carry-on he was getting up to. You know, there's some talks he actually wasn't even playing golf. He was just walking around with a white glove on. But you've heard some news about this. There's some real concerns.
There is. Like, I'm not a huge travel expert by any stretch of the imagination, but Fiji is the one overseas country I've been to, and I happened to make a couple of contacts over there.
Right.
And a bit of news has come across my desk. Smatho, after this video, has come down with a shocking case of Fiji belly. So
Ooh.
the concerning bit about that is on the golf course, I've heard he was caught short on the 17th, which is not confirmed, but you wouldn't wish that upon anyone.
Well, in this situation, maybe Smatho, but
yeah.
as a general rule, no.
So there's one thing Smatho loves more than Jay. It is a free buffet, and I think Smatho might have just overdone it a little bit. If you ever seen Mr. Bean attack the oysters, I'm getting a few reports that Smatho's done likewise, and he did manage to find some Wi-Fi to send that video in to us, but just the Wi-Fi mysteriously dropped out around the same time as these rumours of Fiji belly. So all the best, Smatho. We hope the plane ride home isn't too bad. I hate to think what it would be like with a case of Fiji belly, but we hope to see you back next week.
Well, look, obviously that's really devastating to hear, and I really want to pass on my condolences and regards to everyone in Fiji that had to deal with Smatho, because no doubt it would have been a real messy affair. We hope we have him back, but look, if not, we move on. You know, it was a good run. He's had a really brilliant first 17 shows, but buffets will get you. So I guess you live and learn.
He's left the door open too, Smatho, because we know how much he loves his golf podcast with Jay, but you've had to step in and look at the US PGA. Is that the one we're talking
US
about?
Open. Yeah, US Open. Yep.
Yeah, and if you haven't heard that Smatho does a good job. He might be out of a job after your job with Jay on that podcast, because that was excellent and is a must listen for. Even if you're not into golf, it's always a must listen with Jay talking DFS. So, yeah, how did you find that?
Well, look, that's very kind of you, and it was great talking to Jay. And we do have our article up on the DFR website that previews all the players and some, Dragon's giving his few tips and some picks and fades. But it was great to always chat to Jay. He's very generous with his time, and for us to be able to go through pretty much the top 60 or 70 players and really look at the course and look at the kind of people you want to be putting in your teams was fantastic. Pebble Beach is a very unique course. There's some nuances of some certain players that you don't want to be touching, but also some players you want to be with. So make sure you check that out on the DFR website. It was lots of fun doing it. Always happy to chat with Jay, and look, again, if Smatho doesn't make it back, rest in peace, and we'll just carry on.
Yeah, now I can say this without Smatho around. He did tip us Patrick Cantlay a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, didn't he let us know about it too in our group chat?
He did, but do you want to try and get one back on Smatho? Can you throw a tip out there for us?
Okay, so look, both Jay and I are very bullish about Tiger Woods. We think this is a perfect opportunity for him to win. So, putting Tiger aside for a second, I don't want to take the easy option. I really like Phil Mickelson, and my roughie is Billy Horschel. So we talk a little bit about that on the pod, which you can check out on the site. But also, I got a sneaky message from Jay today after we debated Billy for about 5 minutes on the show last night, and he goes, "You might be right. I've looked into him, and I like him." So, we could be both completely wrong or completely right, but don't you worry about it. If I nail Billy Horschel at $1 gazillion to 1, there is going to be a tweet aplenty, and every one of those is going to tag Smatho. So
I might just send that to Smatho now, actually. If Billy wins, don't come home.
well, don't rush home, that's for sure. But I guess he won't be rushing anywhere with this current news that you've broken at the moment.
Well, there's only one place he's rushing, and that's to damage the Dalton, which has apparently been going on for a good 24 hours. So I think let's get the tablets out, Smatho, and our thoughts are with you, mate.
Yeah, well, yeah, all jokes aside, get home safe, Smatho. Yeah, always happy to hand the chair back over to him. But look, let's straighten up a little bit and move on to the football. So we've got a huge game tomorrow night, Adelaide versus Richmond. Our preview, as always, is up on the site. $75,000 up for grabs at Moneyball. $75,000 at DraftStars, so there's some crazy money around. Adelaide quite convincing favourites at the moment. There is talk of a little bit of rain tomorrow night. How do you think the game's going to go down, Hef?
Well, the obvious is Adelaide, isn't it? But you're a keen Richmond fan, Adji.
I am.
It's not that long ago that an undermanned Richmond team went to Adelaide and knocked off Port Adelaide when no one gave them any chance. Do you reckon we could see something similar?
No.
No.
Look, Richmond have a really good record of beating Port over at the Adelaide Oval, but we have a really poor record of playing Adelaide at Adelaide Oval. So I don't know whether or not it's a matchup thing or it's a bit between the ears. I think Cochin and Edwards both being out tomorrow is a big loss, even though I saw some crazy stats during the week that Richmond are 6-1 without Cochin playing this year and 1-4 with Cochin playing. So I think there's, on the surface, that's a pretty useless stat. But look, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what the young kids can do. I think they can go over there and have pretty much a free swing. But look, I was fairly bullish on Adelaide this year, right from the start of the year, and maybe they are finally getting their shit together and are going to make a little bit of a run. They were semi-impressive, the last couple of weeks. But look, I wouldn't want to have any money on Richmond, put it that way.
Yeah, I saw something on Twitter. They're missing the entire leadership group and the stand-in captain, which is incredible.
Dustin Martin. Dustin Martin is captain for the night, and I think it's the 4th captain we've had this year.
Yeah, wow. But that opens opportunities in DFS, doesn't it?
Sure does. So let's as always start in the rucks. Who do you like?
4,400 Ivan Soldo. I think they've forgotten about him. Moneyball. I think it's just cheap enough to lock and load and worry about everything else. Now, O'Brien is doing a good job keeping Sauce Jacobs out of the team, but there's about $3,000 difference between them. Soldo's been very solid. I think it's a pretty easy one, Soldo, for me.
Yeah, I think at that price, he really only needs to score 60, 65 points, and you've well and truly got full value. Heaven forbid he actually scores more than that, and that's just a complete fill-up. So, yep, agree, Soldo's probably the play there. I did see that Sauce Jacobs is getting close to coming back. Did he play in the Sandful last week?
Yeah, he might have even had 2 games in the Sandful. I know he did kick 5 goals one week. But that said, O'Brien was really good against Mumford last week. I'm a little bit concerned how Mumford's going because points against tables on the DFR website do have GWS giving up a stack of points to Ruckman, with the Mumfords hitting the wall already. But footy-wise, O'Brien did a really good job against him last week, so no real surprise to see him hold his position, but he wouldn't want to have a bad game because Jacobs is knocking on the door.
I think if Jacobs is fit and ready to play, he walks into that team. O'Brien has done well while he's been out, but I can't see them saying no to a fit Jacobs versus O'Brien. I just can't see it happening.
They just want a reason. Give them one reason to get him back in.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Let's move on to the defenders.
I'd prefer not to spend too long on the defenders because I was looking through and couldn't really come up with much value here. I will note that Rory Laird last year had 42 touches, 141 points in this matchup. Basher Hooley's obviously going nuts, but his price inches up now to 9,300. I don't have any great opinion on the back, so I'm going to try and target other positions and then just play a range of different players through my back line.
Yeah, it feels like one of those nights where Grimes could score well. His price is sometimes not great, but yeah, I imagine Adelaide are going to have a fair few entries tomorrow night. It's probably going to depend on what their forward line does, but yeah, the back line certainly wasn't anything that was giving me too much interest either. So let's move to the opposite end of the ground of the forward line. Who do you like down there? Tom Lynch is an interesting one, obviously, for Richmond. Seems to really be in a little bit of a flat spot at the moment, and I guess he was probably promised that he was going to be the second forward with the plans of having Jack there, and that hasn't quite worked out, but he seems to be getting double teamed, can't seem to take a mark, and he's generally an amazing kick for goal and missed a couple of really easy ones last week. So perhaps he's looking forward to the bye.
Yeah, he's going to be up against it again too with Hardigan and Talia. They'll be sort of double teaming him again, one would imagine. Now, Patrick Naish, he almost takes up one spot for us in the forward line. He was rather good last week against Geelong, even though they got flogged. He's still priced way down there, 3,500. He's pretty much a lock. Apart from him, I'm looking towards Adelaide forward line. Richmond's given up quite a few points to the forwards this year. Josh Jenkins is one who takes my eye. I don't think he's going to be as highly owned as what he maybe should be. Last year he had a whopping 114 against Richmond last year. I think Richmond have shown they're a bit susceptible to the tall forwards when Ben Brown ripped them apart a couple of weeks ago. Tommy Hawkins had a good game last week. So I really like Jenkins. Tex Walker, I think, has a great chance as well, as up and down as he's been all year. But mainly I'm working around Naish and Jenkins.
Well, I think, historically Richmond have always given up a lot of points in fantasy, and they sort of have tightened that up over the last couple of weeks. But it feels like it's one of those games that if it is dry and Adelaide really do turn the screws, a couple of the forwards could have a huge fill-up with a very sort of mediocre Richmond backline.
Yeah, that's true. And I have been caught out a couple of times with the Crows, maybe trying to get away from those big guys in the wet, but Jenkins especially is a surprisingly good wet weather big man. A lot of guys he can just put the pen through when the rain comes, but he takes a lot of marks on his chest. He gets out the back a lot. I wouldn't be turned off by the rain with Jenkins, at least.
Yep, okay. And, there's always people like Eddie Betts too, that, occasionally, probably half a dozen times a year he just comes out and kicks 5. It really could be one of those nights tomorrow night. As a Richmond supporter, I'm very fearful, I'll be honest. So let's move into the middle of the ground where most of the action happens. Matt Crouch playing his 100th game, is that right, this week?
Yeah, that's come very quickly, hasn't it? Doesn't feel like he's been around for too long at all, Matt Crouch. This just has points written all over it for the Adelaide midfielders. What do you think they do with Jack Graham? I know he went to Sloane in the grand final a couple of years ago and really shut him down after a big first quarter, but it's sort of been on my radar ever since, and he hasn't really gone to him that often. What do you think they do with him?
I think that's the obvious move, and I think they'll probably try that at some point. It feels that Sloane is dealing with tags better this year. De Boer certainly held him for the first half last week, was that right? And then kind of Sloane found a way to sort of work through it and definitely performed a little bit better towards the second half. I don't know if Graham is 100% right yet. Obviously, he's had a little bit of a break from football, with a leg injury, I think, or hip or something like that. So I know, obviously, the Tigers are very desperate to having some bigger bodies in there at the moment. It seems the obvious play, but with Cochin out now and Edwards out, Graham actually might need to get a little bit of the ball himself. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not they try that. I think it's going to really depend how it starts. I have flashbacks to a game, maybe it was in 2017, where Richmond went over to Adelaide. I think they'd won their first 3 or 4, and the Crows brained them. They kicked like 7 or 8 goals in about 14 minutes. It was something, and the game was basically over. If that happens again, well, it's not going to really matter if you tag Sloan because it's already going to be in the books.
Yeah, you're right about last week. Sloan, I think he was on -1 after a quarter, and he ended up with 80.
Yeah.
80 or so against DeBoer, and we know how good DeBoer's been this year. So, and I also think you're right that they might need Graham just to play an attacking role. There aren't too many obvious inside midfielders there for Richmond between Prestia. I think Dustin Martin's going to play a lot in the middle out of necessity. I don't think they can afford to have him up forward too often. It's pretty thin outside there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think you're starting to rely on people like Jack Higgins and Josh Caddy to play a little bit more sort of midfield time. And look, those guys are great, and they play some really good roles in the Richmond team, but I'm not sure if they're going to be enough to get it over the line. So I definitely think Adelaide mids are looking like a really good play.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Looking at a fade, I like Hugh Greenwood as a player, but he can't get a look in the midfield. He came in as a late replacement for Tom Lynch last week. He pretty much played forward the whole game. I noticed he didn't attend any centre bounces at all.
Yep.
With no changes to the team this week, I think he's going to play a very similar role, and I don't really think it suits him, especially doesn't suit him from a fantasy perspective. So I definitely don't want to be going anywhere near Hugh Greenwood, and I wouldn't be surprised if Hugh Greenwood's not at Adelaide next year because he seems wasted in that sort of role. And with all these midfielders, like Gibbs isn't even in the team and he still can't get a look in the midfield. It seems Cam Ellis-Yeoman's gone past him there. I don't see the Crouch boys going anywhere anytime soon, or Sloan. So, yeah, maybe we'll see Hugh Greenwood next year at a different club.
Interesting take, and interesting you mentioned about Cam Ellis-Yeoman. He's actually been a really nice fantasy play this year. He's been priced definitely on the cheap side, but is well and truly getting value for you week in, week out. So he's definitely someone to look at. Look, it's going to be an interesting game. As we said, preview is up on the site, so go and check it out if you want to get all the tips. And obviously, our cheat sheets and our player out and our correlations are all going to be there. So if you want to get a bit more information on that game, go and check it out. All right, so let's move on to the next game, which is Friday, Essendon versus Hawthorn. We have a $100,000 tournament at Draft Stars and $75,000 at Moneyball. So lots of big cash to be won on a Friday night. The money and the market has moved towards Essendon after some big ins were queried that were going to play, or not queried, should I say, suggested that they were going to play. Shield, Fantasia, and who's the other one? Checking my notes. Stringer. Which obviously is always handy, or they're always handy additions. I personally thought Hawthorn, this was a really good spot for them. Clarko has a little bit of a habit of really choking down on teams. Essendon really battle to play against teams with any kind of structure. But it's at Marvel. That's certainly somewhere that suits Essendon. But what's your take on it? How do you think the game will flow?
That's sort of a narrative with Clarkson, isn't it? When they come off the bye, everyone loves saying, oh, Clarkson's had 2 weeks to look at this other team, and Hawthorn do generally come out and perform really well. So I'm sort of with you on Hawthorn. I'm perennially scared of Essendon, but without any great confidence in them at all. But anytime they feel they're underdogs, or they want to run some kamikaze stuff through the middle, they do have a lot of pace when they want to use it. So I never like having too big of an opinion in Essendon games, and I always tend to cover a few bases with my DFS teams. Those guys you named, Shield, Fantasia, Stringer, they have pretty big implications for a few other guys who've been getting through the midfield lately. We saw Clark come in and do an amazing job on Patrick Cripps 2 weeks ago, out of the wilderness, basically.
Yeah.
And they're talking he might not even get a game.
It feels like a little bit of ducks and drakes with that. If you've uncovered somebody that clearly can shut down one of the best midfields in the game, why wouldn't you be playing him? Like, Essendon need to be finding out which of these guys can play roles and stand up in the future. So it seems crazy that, unless there's something else going on that we don't know about, Surely you bring him in, don't you? Just give him a role to learn for nothing more than that.
Yeah, well, Jaeger Amir is a pretty obvious target there for Hawthorn, so I assume he's going to get a go. If he does get a go, he's 3,500 still on Moneyball. He's basically a lock. He not only did he stop Cripps, but he turned up. Just incredible performance, basically, in his first game for the year. Darcy Parish is another one who's really dependent on his midfield time. When he plays up forward, he looks horrendous. He starts to look a bit better when he's running through the midfield in his preferred role. But with Shield coming back, they do love playing Jakey Stringer in the centre bounces. So I'd be a little bit nervous on where Parish fits in if all those guys do come back.
Yeah, look, Stringer's an interesting one. I think Jake Stringer, if you barrack for Essendon, you would adore him. But if you don't barrack for Essendon, I think he's one of those blokes that's really easy to hate. And being a non-Essendon supporter, I'm happy to see him in the midfield because I think he's really dangerous in the forward line. He has some good goal sense. He just loves to get his foot on the boot. He's not looking off for handballs and things like that. So I think if you've got Jake Stringer playing in the midfield against you, you're happy because he can be dangerous in that forward line.
Yeah, I think he's won a few people over this year, Stringer. He obviously lost a few fans when he first turned up to Essendon, but this year he's been rather consistent. A lot of fans of the Bombers like to tell you that he's probably up there high in their best and fairest, but as a DFS option, I think a lot of his good work isn't really reflected on the fantasy scores. So him coming back, I think it's got more effect on other guys rather than wanting to play Stringer by any imagination. Just looking at Hawthorn. Obviously, O'Meara. If Clark doesn't play, I'm really keen on O'Meara. I think that would signal Essendon's intent not to bother about him too much and to try and go head-to-head with guys like Merritt and Heppel. So, yeah, if there's no Clark, I'm really keen on O'Meara. But if Clark does play, then I'm really wary of O'Meara, and I don't really want much to do with him.
Yep, no, very, very good call. I'm a big believer of Essendon are a team of downhill skiers. And it's probably well, I'll get to it in a second, but David Zaharakis is pretty much the poster boy for the ski club at Essendon. When Essendon light it up and play freely and run and score fast and they look like they are the best team going around, he always has a field day. So he is one of those people that if Essendon do get on top and are allowed to play the way they want to, I think he is an interesting pick. And it's probably a good time, as I'm putting up on the screen now, I've got a couple of little sneaky picks which sort of go in the vein of what Smatho likes to follow along with. So Zaharakis to get 30 disposals at $4.33 or anywhere $4 above, I think is a really great price. And also Rory Laird, which we talked about before. You know, he had 42 against Richmond last year. They could give up a ton of disposals. 35 for him at $4.20, I think, is some great sneaky spots if you want to have a little bit of a wager on either of those games. But definitely the way the game flows is going to dictate very much with DFS. I think another little interesting one for Essendon is that Tip and Woody, whenever Essendon win, he seems to kick a bag. When Essendon don't win, he doesn't get anywhere near the footy. So that's certainly something to keep in mind if you're building some Essendon stacks. If you're trying to think how it's going to roll out and play out, you know, Essendon needs kick goals. He might be in for one of those nights where he kicks 5.
Yeah, that's a good take for if you're looking to play Essendon teams, like you say. Zaharakis and Tip and Woody are two blokes that you want to have running through those teams because they're obviously two guys who are likely to stand up if they're going to win. So I like that take. I also like looking at the back line for Essendon. Now, Hawthorn give up a stack of points to back line seemingly every week. Moneyball do give us the option of playing Ko Hooker in the forward line. So if we really want to load up on the back line and hope that the Hawks are forcing them to chip it back and forth, we can play Hooker and Hurley together. We can also throw another Essendon back in like Redmond, Sard, McGrath, even Aaron Francis is a bit of a point of difference. So just being able to play Hooker in the forward line, we can get 2 backs. We can even use our flex if we really want to load up from that angle. And I definitely want to be focusing on Essendon defenders. But I would like to get Sicily in my team as well. I do like Sicily with his high ceiling, but yeah, plenty of options in the back line there. I think the right options in the back line are going to be key to winning this slate.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. And someone like Hurley could have an absolute field day tomorrow on Friday night. I think you mentioned a couple of weeks ago on the show that it's almost as though Clarko doesn't care if opposition teams are kicking the ball around their back line. I guess it's a lot of teams use that as their starting point of how they're going to attack. But clearly Clarko believes in his system enough that he's like, well, fine, if you want to kick it, from end to end, wing to wing, pocket to pocket, go for your life. We're not going to come and try to take it off you. So, yeah, very good idea and a good play, and certainly something to think about with some of your stacks, and also just, getting some value out of your back line. So, look, it's Hawthorn for me, but I'll definitely be making some teams that'll be going in both directions.
Yeah, I'll be doing the same. Like I said, I struggle to get a handle on Essendon and Hawthorn. Sort of, they're a bit the same for me. So I'll be playing a range and just hoping to lob on the right scenario.
Beautiful. So let's move on to Saturday. So we've got another standard bye weekend 3-game slate, which always feels like a little bit of a weird Saturday with only 3 games. So we've got Gold Coast and St Kilda up at Townsville. We've got Freo and Port over in Freo. And we have Carlton and Western Bulldogs in Marvel. So let's touch on the Gold Coast game first of all. Obviously, Gold Coast have surprised a few people this year. They haven't necessarily got the results on the board, but I think it's pretty much agreeable that we all think that they are doing a lot better and have been performing a lot better. St Kilda obviously have just come back from China. They had a little bit of, well, how should we say it, Smatho-like issues over there with a few too many buffets and dumplings. So we imagine those sorts of things will be resolved, but Geary redoing his leg is definitely a huge loss for them.
Yeah. It's a weird schedule, isn't it? Off to China, have a bye, and then up to Townsville. I hope they're in better nick than Smatho is. Every week we're looking to target Gold Coast. I do agree with you that they've improved, but they are still a very young team and they do give up a lot of fantasy points. So targeting St Kilda is a bit of an obvious play. I'm a little bit wary that they're going to a new ground, so I don't think there's been a game at Townsville. I couldn't find any when I was doing some research, and I do know that when they play up at Cairns, these smaller grounds, they do tend to get affected by the wind a bit more than usual. They don't have the big grandstands sort of buffeting the play. That's probably more a punting angle if you want to back the team kicking with the wind. That's always a good angle to take. We saw Will Brodie. He just dominated against North Melbourne and had a huge fantasy score. I think we're going to start to see some of these young guys as we get into the second half of the year start to stand up a bit. Jack Lukosius is one I sort of want to single out. He had to go back when Jordan Murdoch got injured last week against North Melbourne and had 36. I think he had 36 in the last quarter. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I did like him playing sort of across half back. So he's obviously very cheap because he hasn't scored much by way of fantasy points this year. He might be one guy to look at for Gold Coast if you're looking for a bit of value.
Yep. And what about on the St Kilda side of things? Where do you think they're at? Obviously, they've got a ton of injuries, and we all know about some of the issues that have been going off field. It feels like at the start of the season you would have penciled this in as an easy game for St Kilda to win, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion, though.
No, I think you're right. I think targeting, I would say target Seb Ross. He seems like the obvious one. We saw Clayton Oliver go massive. We saw Zeeble last week go massive. That real inside midfielder seems to be doing the job, but Seb Ross seems to have got away from that role a little bit this year. He hasn't had the big scores like we've seen from him before. Maybe Jack Steele's the one who might go big. He's the mould of that inside bull that seems to be ripping Gold Coast apart. So maybe Jack Steele's one to target there.
Seb Ross is an interesting one because obviously last year him and Stephen week in week out were coming out with huge scores. Obviously Stephen not playing this season, it was probably all a natural conclusion that we thought that Ross would just go nuts. You know what I mean? He was going to be the key one, but it kind of feels like it's been the opposite. He's probably dropped in 20% of his output when it comes to DFS, and even people that are playing Supercoach will know this. He's just doesn't seem to be the player that he was.
Yeah, like he's averaging 90 for the season, hasn't been above 100 in his last 4 games, and he has been disappointing. He seems like he's had a number of good spots and he just hasn't delivered. So I don't know whether it's a form thing or whether it is a different role. I do see some of the Saints fans talking about him not being involved in the thick of things as much as he has been in past years. So maybe that's it. Obviously, these guys, they can bounce back. We saw Angus Brayshaw bounce back from a pretty dry run on Monday and have a big 120. If you do happen to find them on the day they bounce back, then you're laughing. But it is hard to have too much confidence in him to go really big at the moment.
And the problem is he's still priced as though he's going to go big, which is always a little bit of a deterrent. But it's a little bit of a weird game. I'm not sure if that's a game that I ultimately want to be targeting. I think it's the obvious one to target. People always want to take on against Gold Coast, but for me, I think it's probably going to be some other choices. So let's move on to the next game of Freo and Port. And look, we don't need to go through all these in too much detail. The money, obviously, is leaning a little bit towards Freo, has moved a little bit back towards Port this week with the news of Rory Lobb being out for the rest of the season. I still like Freo over in Freo. I think it's, Ross has very much the tendency to choke teams and stop them from scoring, and Ken Hinckley's been quite open that he's been wanting to really increase the scoring from Port Adelaide this year, and they may shut that down a little bit, but it's going to be an interesting game. And as we know, Port are not afraid of winning over in West Coast.
Yeah, they killed the Eagles over there early in the year. What an upset that was, Freo beating Collingwood at the MCG.
Amazing, yeah.
The bye probably came at a bad time because they just had so much momentum off that one. Whether they've had time to sit there and think how good they are for the past couple of weeks, and then they might get caught on the hop. But if there's one team that you can shut down, it seems to be Port. Their forward line can be really dysfunctional at times. They sort of rely heavily on Robbie Gray. Patrick Ryder isn't the player he seemed to be. Todd Marshall didn't seem to work for them. Westhoff hasn't been sighted for much of the year. So this could turn into a really low-scoring game. And for that, I think both teams' backlines are probably worth looking at using in sort of some stacks. Freo do give up a lot of points to backs, and there's a heap of options from Port Adelaide. Even the likes of Lynett, Burton, Houston, Dougal Howard when he's back there. They do have a lot of backline players who like to chip the ball around, so I don't mind looking at that. And then obviously Freo stacks, always at home, they're always in play. Guys like Luke Ryan. Be interested to see if a guy like Harley Bennell comes in, or Stephen Hill. They're talking that they're pretty close. They might come back in a little bit underpriced. It's a really interesting game. I don't really know which way it's going to go, but I do want to have little bits of exposure to either side.
Yeah, and Connor Blakely's another interesting one too. He was an absolute ball magnet last year and obviously has been injured and he's slowly working his way back. I kind of feel that one of these games is perfect for him where he is just going to go nuts and have 30, 35 touches. So there's definitely some interest there to have a look at. It's funny that you mentioned the Port Adelaide backline. None of those guys are really marquee players. They're names that you're not overly familiar with. They play week in, week out, but they're not really superstars of the competition, which I think it can be great for DFS because they're always going to have low ownership. The non-sexy names, people are just not going to be drawn to. So that's definitely not a bad angle to be looking at if you are trying to extract a little bit of value, especially if Freo are going to give up some points to Port backline.
Yeah, the only concern is they all went berserk against the Saints over there in China, so they are priced up a little bit that we have to compete with. But everything's not perfect, is it?
No. But look, people that are looking at stats properly and stuff realise that you can't sort of hold too much in one game biases, and yes, some of the prices will be a little bit distorted. But if you're looking for something that's a little bit different, that could be a nice little angle. So we'll move on to the third game, which is probably the most interesting one of the Saturday slate, which is Carlton versus the Western Bulldogs at Marvel. Obviously, Carlton are up and about at the moment, and they feel like they've won the premiership the last couple of weeks, and it's really good to see that new coach brings out a winning culture and feeling. And I've got lots of Carlton fans, and Smatho obviously is one of those, and very excited to see them finally win a game and play with a little bit of freedom. But gee, the doggies, you just don't know how to or what to make of them this year. You see them destroy a team like Richmond, which I guess now the form line for Richmond has come a little bit true. But then other weeks they just don't show up. With some of the fantasy jets and DFS jets that the doggies have in that team, it feels like a game where a lot of those guys could just go berserk if it's a doggies victory.
Yeah, they're the most disappointing team of the year for me, the Bulldogs. Not only from a footy perspective, but from a DFS perspective. Trying to guess where Luke Beveridge is going to play these blokes every week just makes you want to pull your hair out. The likes of Dunkley, McRae, Liberatore, even Bontempelli when he's spending more time forward than what you'd hope for if you're playing him as in your team. It just drives you insane. It wasn't that long ago these two teams played, and Carlton just gave it to the Bulldogs, which was a bit out of the blue. I'm sure there was a million Bulldog stacks because obviously the stats say that the Carlton give up a heap of points. You'd like to think that the Bulldogs are a great spot to attack again, but well, Carlton, they got the new coach. They're playing a bit freer, and we've got Ed Curnow now to worry about, who did a great job on Lachie Neale last week. 90 odd after the first half. Lachie Neale ended up on 104, and Curnow turned up himself. One of the better tagging jobs I've seen this year. So you've got to wonder, is Curnow going to go to anyone? It would probably be Bontempelli. So that's he might not go there. So it's such a guessing game with Bulldogs every week. It just drives me mad.
Well, it's really hard to make a case for what happened last week. Questionably Brisbane went home at half-time. It looked like that game was absolutely won and done. And then they just stopped. Absolutely stopped. Obviously, Zorko took a little bit of a hit on his hip, I think, early in the second quarter, which kind of slowed him down. And I think there was someone else on the bench too from memory, but it slips my mind at this current second. So clearly there were a couple of injuries, but it was almost as though Brisbane just, packed it up and went home. But Carlton are an interesting one. Cripps is clearly one of the best players in the league, and if you let him run free and go nuts, it's a little bit of a barometer for what Carlton will do. For a long time, everyone said if you stop Cripps, you stop Carlton. I'm not overly sure that's still the case. They seem to be playing with a little bit more freedom now, as I mentioned before. But it's going to be an interesting game. What you mentioned before about Beveridge is crazy. Like, what has happened to Jack McRae? Jack McRae was the ultimate DFS player. You put him in your team, you're happy to pay a stupid price for him, and you know he was going to get you anywhere from 120 to 10 million points. It was literally as simple as that. Bontempelli to a certain extent. Like, Bontempelli was probably arguably, up there in the Brownlow count for the first 3 or 4 rounds, and then suddenly he just becomes a forward. It's almost as though Beveridge is, trying to stop these guys from really going nuts. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, and then just when we thought, there's no Mitch Wallace, there was another guy that pulled out. They brought in Lipinski and just put him in the middle and said, we'll just keep rotating these other guys through half forward. It doesn't make any sense to me either. One thing to look at with this match is the ruck situation. These are the top 2 teams in the comp for giving up points to opposition ruckmen. So on that basis, Cruiser and Tim English are pretty obvious targets for this slate.
Yep.
One thing I will note that Carlton has been much better the last few weeks. I know that they dropped down from giving up over 100 points to rucks. They're down in sort of the high 80s now with the return of Cruiser. So with that in mind, maybe Cruiser is the better option. But I will note that English outscored Cruiser when they played earlier in the year. But the main guy was Harry Mackay when he had his big 120 odds, and he led me to DFS glory, but we won't touch on that too much.
A little bit of head wobble there as you recount that. And look, Mackay that day just was clunking everything. He couldn't miss. Everyone was like, "Where's this guy been?" Considering he's sort of been on the, in the DFS wilderness and the AFL wilderness for the last 3 or 4 years. Look, I think it's a doggy's play for me that night. I love Cruiser. I think he's caught a few people off guard the last couple of weeks. I certainly know in a couple of the chats that I'm in, guys are like, how the hell do people find Cruiser? Well, people forget that he's actually a really good ruckman. He's just been incredibly unlucky with injuries. So I think he'll probably monster Tim English, but we'll have to see. It's going to be an interesting way, and I could see a lot of teams absolutely flying home with some doggies and some Carlton players late Saturday night.
Yeah, but it's an interesting slate, actually. There's a lot of different angles you can take here. So, it's not just a rock up and play a GWS stack and hope to win the money, that's for sure.
Yep, absolutely. So we move on to Sunday, which is single game slate. Good old bye weekends. It feels really weird just having one game. A good old 3:20 game down at the very, very sunny Blundstone Arena between North Melbourne and GWS. The big news this week, obviously, Sean Higgins has fractured his shoulder or broken his shoulder, so he's going to be out for 4 or 5 weeks, I think, which then is, poses the big question of where De Boer is going to go to. Obviously, Higgins would have been an absolutely obvious choice. Does he go to Zeeble now, or Cunnington, or who does he go to? He's got to go to somebody. He's the best tagger in the league.
I think he goes to Zeeble. Cunnington, he's a very good player, Cunnington, but he doesn't seem like the type of guy that you want to tag, or even that you could tag if you wanted to, because he's always first to the ball, and then that's about it for him. I think it's pretty much a sure thing that he stays in this midfield role now that Higgins is gone. He's been dominating in that position, but I think he's very, very gettable for De Boer. So if he does go to him, De Boer, I don't care that Zeebel's 8,200. I wouldn't want to play him at 3,200. I think he's just he's ripe for the picking, and De Boer is the best we've seen this year when it comes to tagging.
There was an interesting game a couple of weeks ago, and you're probably going to be better with the numbers than I will, that Zeeble had a couple of really hot games, and then suddenly, I can't remember who he played, but he was on like 9 points at half-time and had an absolute shocker. Was it perhaps the Sydney game? I can't recall, but he absolutely went missing. And I fear, and pretty much to agree with what you were saying there's a good chance that he's just completely shut out of this game.
Yeah, that was the Bulldogs game. He had 48 overall, and that was the last straw for Brad Scott. On your bike, son. He was coming off 155 against the Swans down here in Tassie. So he obviously loves Blunston. Who doesn't?
Who doesn't?
What a wonderful ground it is. Home of Darcy Short, of course. But yeah, since Reece Shaw's taken over, back into the midfield, a couple of hundreds, a massive ton last week against Gold Coast, which gave us a glimpse of what he can do with no Higgins in the lineup. But he's got to be popular, but it's just so scary. There's no one else for De Boer to go to. He's not going to the Frenchman, Froggy Dumont, Jared Polek. Who cares about some of these blokes? Zeeble is just the obvious target, and I'd be shocked if he didn't go to him.
Yep.
Now, it's interesting with GWS. They are clearly the stingiest team in the comp now. They give up over 50 points less than any other team has all season per game. That's still holding true for the past 5 games as well, and it's straight across the board, except for the ruck. So Mumford, we mentioned before, he's getting a bit leakier. So I think Goldstein's probably the play in terms of the rucks. But looking at those North midfielders to try and take over from Higgins, we've got blokes like Davey Zuniacki, Jed Anderson, Jai Simpkin maybe will step up with a bit more midfield team. But it's such a bad matchup going up against GWS that might just offset the initial advantage you think you might be able to pick up with some of these cheaper guys.
Yeah, it feels like it's a GWS stack all day, every day at this game. Obviously there's a little bit of money around to play for. Have a couple of North Melbourne guys in your team, but it just feels like one of those games that GWS either win by 80 points and just show that they're the class team that they are, or GWS rock down there, not really prepared, still a little bit sort of mentally on holidays, and North come and do what they did to like Adelaide a few years ago down at Tassie. So it's a real interesting one for me, but I think I would be very much leaning towards GWS for that game.
Yeah, they are 1-1 in they played down here the last 2 years, GWS, and they've split those games with North. Interestingly, they had to go to Adelaide, then they're home, and then they're back to Tassie within a week. They're a bit stiff there. There is a chance that it's too cold for them down here and they don't turn up, and we do know North play Bludston Arena very well, so while GWS stacks, they do look the obvious with the likes of Taranto and Kelly and Canelio and Hopper and all those guys through the midfield. There's a glimmer of hope for the contrarians of us out there with North Melbourne.
And obviously Whitfield is out for GWS. Zach Williams is back. But I also saw somewhere that, is it Nick Haynes is out as well, who has been playing pretty good for GWS. So
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, so that might give a little bit of a bump to a couple of other GWS defenders. Something to sort of keep an eye out for teams. Obviously, it's a bit hard to speculate on that on a Wednesday. But yeah, he's definitely someone we want to be keeping a little bit of an eye out for. Interesting about what you were saying about Mumford. I think he's just a grumpy old man. Like, it feels like, he's back playing, probably needed a paycheck. They didn't really have any other options. But he's almost going... Some games he goes for world records free kicks against. He's just crazy. He's such a big unit, it just seemed angry. So I'd be incredibly shocked if he plays again next year.
Yeah. Goldstein doesn't seem like the bravest guy coming up against Mumford either, does he?
No, but at least Goldstein you'd think is probably going to outsmart him a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a horrible one to choose from. So, yeah, interesting. So make sure you check that out. Obviously, 50,000 at Moneyball, 40,000 at Draft Stars. So not only with all the AFL action going on, cricket has been on every night. Have you been getting stuck into any of the World Cup, both at Moneyball and Draft Stars?
I haven't played as much as I would have liked to. I did have a go the other night with South Africa and the Windies, and loaded up the Windies bowlers and got off to a flyer with Mr. Salute Cottrell.
Yes.
But then the rain obviously stuffed that up for everyone.
How good is it having a World Cup in England? What a genius idea that was.
I actually love watching cricket in England with some of these grounds are so small. I do like the very sort of commentators we get and stuff over there, but this rain is just driving us nuts. Just as we talk, Steve Smith's out. He's just been dismissed by Hafiz for 10. So the Aussies now 2 down for 190 in the 29th over. So they're still going pretty well. But
that's smelling like a very close to a mid-threes 400 score there.
Yeah, Davey Warner's just picking himself up. He's got run a ball 80. They could get pretty messy.
Yeah, okay.
But how good is it? It's something on every night. And even just watching Bangladesh and Afghanistan, they swing the bat. They make it interesting. I'm loving it.
Absolutely. And for DFS lovers, I remember, you only have to wind back a couple of years ago where we were playing $2,000 or $3,000 contests for Big Bash. We're getting $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 contests.
Yep.
It's brilliant. And, you can get home, chuck a few teams in, wait for the toss to happen. And then, if you're brave enough to stay up past, midnight, you can sort of see a good chunk of cricket.
Yeah, it's you're on the edge of the bed. You wake up, first thing you do, grab the phone, just have a quick look at how the lineups went, and generally roll back over and go back to sleep. But every once in a while, it'll be enough to get us up early.
Indeed. And look, as always, DFR have you covered with our exclusive cheat sheets and previews for every single Cricket World Cup game. No one else in the industry does cricket projections like we do. So if you need a little bit of help with building a team that perhaps they're not familiar, it might be Bangladesh or Pakistan or someone like that, away from the core nations, we've got predictions and values and tips for all those teams. So make sure you go and check out the website and get stuck into some of those. Now, it wouldn't be a DFR, DFS Down Under, the good old Smatho tagline mess up. DFS Down Under show, NRL review. We're all excited about NRL. Obviously, we've got the round 14 tips, the article up there from the great man, Andrew Ferguson. Hef, talk to me about NRL this weekend. How excited are you? How many lineups are you going to build? How many games are you going to watch?
I really thought I was going to get a week off NRL.
No chance. It's part of my list. It's Smatho texted me before he went on to his deathbed.
I thought I threw that list away, but well, the NRL guys, they just dominate the NRL, don't they? But if you do like NRL, well, there's contests to be played and there's money to be won, and if you have some knowledge about NRL, I reckon there's probably more of an edge there because there's a lot of guys like me who just don't have a clue about it. So,
and myself,
yeah.
Also,
Smatho just keeps telling us about it, but
doesn't he love it?
There's only so many hours in the day, isn't there?
That's it, and we've got so much choice at the moment between cricket and golf and AFL and baseball and NBA finals. There's so much sport we can sink our teeth into. Oh, NBA. Well, we won't even get involved with that tonight. But look, we've had a good show. We've managed not to blow up too many things. Obviously, we didn't go live tonight because clearly a little bit of the system had a bit of Fiji belly, whatever it is, diarrhea, which is what Smatho's got. So we hope the great man comes back. Hef, thank you as always. You've been the rock. You're always very good to share your time and all your info every week to all the listeners and the viewers. So I hope you have a great weekend, and thanks again for being on the DFS Down Under show.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me. Get well, Smatho.
See you next week.